The big sort is what Pulitzer Prize finalist Bill Bishop named a trend he stumbled on when he was doing research on economics in cities across America. In 1976, less than a quarter of Americans lived in places where the presidential election was a landslide. By 2004, nearly half of all voters lived in landslide counties. Turns out that starting in the mid-1960s, Americans began, unintentionally, forming tribes. Here's how it happened. Before the big sort, whether you lived in San Diego, California, Raleigh, North Carolina, Bismarck, North Dakota, or anywhere in America in between, we tended to stick close to our hometowns for financial and personal security. And our neighbors were our neighbors. Some of them were conservative, some were liberal, some were just strange. But we kind of put up with the people who shared our lives. We knew that when push came to shove, we'd have to depend on each other. So before the big sort, communities tended to be organized geographically. But it wasn't just geography we shared. We got our information from pretty much the same places as our neighbor did, whether they happened to be on our side of the political aisle or not. In 1964, the daily newspaper was the most common source of information for 80% of households. Much to journalists' chagrin, they haven't seen numbers like that since. Before the big sort, we turned on the television and chose ABC, CBS, NBC. Remember when the addition of Fox was big news? Now we have a network for anything you can possibly imagine. And churches were geographically based before the big sort as well. If you were a Methodist, you'd go to the Methodist church up the road, and Episcopalian or Presbyterian, the same thing. Ideology had little to do with where you landed. And most Americans were involved in civic groups. The Garden Club, the Bridge Club, the PTA, the Elks Lodge, Masonic Temple, the Bowling League, that had nothing to do with what your thoughts were on politics. The big sort started somewhere in the mid-60s, and the major change was that our affluence created so many more choices for us. We were mobile. We didn't have to stay in our hometown anymore, so we went out to find where we wanted to be. If you were conservative, maybe you loved Dallas, Texas. You liked how important football and hunting were. You loved the strong presence of large churches. If you were liberal, you were doing the same thing. For you, Austin, Texas might have been the ticket, with a vibrant arts and music community, a college town, health food stores. Turns out people from all over America were making the same choices, driven by their tastes, certainly not by political philosophy as far as any of them really knew. So communities that drew conservatives were starting to look more like this, and liberal-leaning communities were looking more like this. But it wasn't just about geography. It was about the way our society was structured. Membership in broad-based cross-class civic groups plummeted in the late 60s, and civic life was abruptly and fundamentally reorganized. Geography-based clubs like bowling leagues yielded to ideology-based groups that had a point of view and an agenda. Mainline churches split over ideology, and people chose a church by whether it was on their side of the political divide or not. Our geographical communities, once broadly connected, became like isolated islands that foster distinct forms of life. But it wasn't just about our communities. Now we could turn on the television and find people who saw everything our way. The internet was even better. We could find our people, regardless of how few of them there were, and enjoy a warm bubble bath of agreement. Al-Qaeda is a product of where our technological innovations meet tribalism on the internet. We even read different books and listen to different radio stations. Bill Bishop writes in The Big Sort, we're now living in a giant feedback loop, hearing our own thoughts about what's right and wrong bounced back to us by the television shows we watch, the newspapers and books we read, the blogs we visit online, the sermons we hear, and the neighborhoods we live in. With all the choices that modern society had brought us, we began choosing the comfort of agreement. The thing is, social psychologists had studied like-minded groups for over 100 years and could predict how people living in worship in homogeneous groups would react. As people heard their beliefs reflected and amplified, they would become more extreme in their thinking. Studies have even shown that when called upon to make a group decision, a group of like-minded people will actually make a riskier decision that any individual in that group would make alone. This is called the risky shift phenomena. If given factual information that their opinion is wrong, these groups will actually ignore that evidence. People simply don't believe what they see or hear if it runs counter to their strong, established, existing beliefs. It turns out, though, that the Big Sword is really a very, very old new problem. Back in the first days of our republic, legislators would come from different geographical regions and end up living in Washington, D.C. in boarding houses. They lived under the same roof, they ate all their meals together, and they began voting as blocks. As President Thomas Jefferson spoke about the legislators and the block voting problem, he said they came to work in a spirit of avowed misunderstanding without the smallest wish to agree. Remember that this form of government was a radical and dangerous and new idea, and many thought that only homogeneous groups could self-govern, the Anti-Federalists. Anti-Federalist writer Brutus wrote about the constant clashing of opinions that he feared would prevent groups that were diverse from self-governing, but Alexander Hamilton and James Madison had a different opinion. They believed that the diversity of opinion promoted deliberation and circumspection and serves to check excesses in the majority. James Madison called the Bill of Rights a mere parchment barrier compared to factionalism, which was the ultimate check on power. Ultimately, it was Madison and Hamilton and the Federalists who won the day about what our form of government would become. They bet our future on the concept that our differences could be a strength, and Americans have repeatedly risen to the call of their challenge to us. Our founders had profound philosophical disagreements, but as they went about the business of building a country, an endeavor that, if unsuccessful, would surely lead to their hanging, they hardly had the luxury to stop talking to each other. The philosophical descendants of Madison, Hamilton, the Federalists, the Anti-Federalists, Jefferson, Adams, Washington, are alive and well today in us, in this amazing American experiment in the course of human events. And we are still writing the history of their revolution. Like the founders, we hardly have the luxury to stop talking to each other. In Jefferson's day, he solved the problem of the block voting in the boarding houses by something simple. He invited legislators in small groups to come have dinner in the White House. He sat them around a round table. He served them good food and good drink. Maybe it seems like a small thing, but we think it's a place to start. Please read The Big Sword. It will change everything about how you see the partisan divide in America today.
1, 2, 3, My baby don't mess around because she loves me so